we're making some awesome progress. And at this offsite, there are going to be lots of questions that come up, like how much revenue do we earn from customers, or how many times has each customer ordered? And I pulled together this table over on the side using functions that answer a lot of these questions. The only problem is people want to shift around the data. Maybe they want to see it by year. And the trouble is I can't really build these tables as quickly as they ask their questions. Luckily, at last year's offsite, someone suggested to me that we should use pivot tables. With pivot tables, you can analyze your data in a breeze. It makes it so easy. In fact, it's so easy that you don't even have to use formulas or functions anymore to analyze your data. Let's check these out. Here I am on the data management worksheet. And once again, here we can see all of the customer orders at the Kevin Cookie Company. Over on the right-hand side, I constructed this table to summarize some of the data that we see over here. For instance, for customer number 1, I wanted to know, well, how much total revenue did we earn from this customer? And I used a function called SUMIFS to calculate that. I also wanted to know how many orders did we receive from customer number 1. And to calculate that, I used another function called COUNTIFS. So I answered those functions and I copied it down for all of these customers. And it worked okay, but it took a little bit of time to create this view. Now, let's say during the offsite, Patty says, well, this is great, but I want to see the total revenue and number of orders also by product and by customer. Well, of course, I could create another table just like that answers that question, but that's going to take a little bit of time. Instead, we can use something called a pivot table, and you'll be surprised at how easy it is to build or recreate this same view using a pivot table. And best of all, you don't even have to enter in a single formula. So what are you waiting for? Let's check this out. To insert a pivot table, first off, you have to make sure that your data is organized in columns like this. So you have your headers on top and then all of the data below. Next, place your cursor somewhere within the data. And then let's go to the tab up on top titled Insert. And over on the left-hand side, we see the option to insert a pivot table. Let's click on this button right here. This opens up the pivot table dialog. And first off, it wants to know, well, what data do you want to include in your pivot table? And here it made a best guess. Remember, we placed our cursor here, so it highlights all of this data. And this is the exact range that I want to include. Down below, we could decide where we want to place the pivot table. I want to put it on a new worksheet. Next, let's click on OK. This has now dropped us on a new worksheet, and over on the left-hand side, we have our pivot table. There's nothing there yet, but we're going to build it out. Over on the right-hand side, we have what's called pivot table fields. And here you see all of these different fields. You have things like the customer ID, the order ID, the product, and you might recognize some of these. If I click back into the data management sheet, here you'll notice that all of these headers for this table appear as fields in the pivot table fields. So let's see if we could reconstruct this table within the data management sheet. Now, once again, I wanted the customer ID as the rows. Let's go back to the pivot table sheet. And if we look down at the bottom, I have these 4 different squares. We have filters, columns, rows, and values. Now remember, on data management, I want the customer ID to be on a row. So back within the pivot table, let's take the customer ID, I'll click on it, and then drag it down to the rows. Then I'll release. And look at that, our pivot table over on the left-hand side updated. And we see all of our customers at the Kevin Cookie Company, customer 1 through 5. So far we've matched this exactly. We're making good progress. Back within the pivot table, next we want to know how much revenue we earned from each customer. Once again, in data management, that's the next column. Here we have the total revenue. Back within the pivot table, let's click into the pivot table, and I want to show the revenue. So if I look here at all of the different fields, here I see one for revenue. Let's click on that, drag it down, and instead of placing it in rows, we're going to place it in values. We want to know what was the total revenue. And when I release it, here we see it says sum of revenue. If we look over at the pivot table, here now I see the sum of the revenue for each individual customer. Here I could click on home, and let's change this to currency, and here I'll remove the decimal places. So it looks like customer 1, we earned about $521,000. If I click back into the data management tab, here I see $521,000 for customer number 1. That was pretty easy to calculate the revenue. I didn't even have to enter in a function like sum if s. I simply dragged and dropped. It really couldn't be any easier than just dragging and dropping. Last, there's another column called number of orders. So let's see if we can also place this in the pivot table. Once again, I'll click into the pivot table sheet. And if I look here, there's a field titled order ID. I bet I could get a count of all of the order IDs. Here, I'll click on this and then drag it down to the values square right down here. And look at that. Here we have a sum of order IDs, but I want a count of order IDs. Before we change it to count, let's change this. Right now it's set to currency, but let's select all of these cells. And here I'll simply change it to this format. I'll also remove the decimal places for this as well. Down below, if we look at the values, right now it's giving us a sum of all of the order IDs, but that doesn't make any sense to sum up the order IDs. Let's click on this arrow icon right here. And right at the bottom, there's the option for value field settings. Let's click on this. This opens up a prompt where we can decide how we want to summarize the value field. And currently it's set to sum up all of the order IDs. Now, I wanted a count of the order IDs. So here I could select count, but here I could also set it to the average, the max, the min, the product. And if I scroll down here, you have many different options. Now, I think a count looks good. Let's click on OK. And here I now see a count of all of the orders. So customer number 1 had 92 orders. If I click back into the data management tab, here I can confirm that customer number 1 did in fact have 92 orders. And check that out. I've now recreated this table without entering in a single formula. Once again, pivot tables make analysis so incredibly easy. As we've been seeing throughout this entire course, there are always many different ways that you can do the same thing in Excel. To change this to the count, we clicked down here and then we selected value field settings, but I could also simply right click here, and here you can select summarize values by, and here you could change it right in line. So once again, there are many different ways to access the same controls. Usually you could right click or select a button over here on the side and you can get to those same options. Now, once again, pivot tables are incredibly easy to work with. All you have to do is drag and drop, and you can experiment with different views. One thing you might notice is we have this same drop-down arrow appear by the row labels. And if you remember from earlier, when we click on that, we can sort and we could also filter. Let's say we just want to see, let's say customers 1 through 3. Here I could uncheck select all, and I'll select the first 3 customers, then click on OK, and here I've now filtered my pivot table. Here I'll clear that filter again so we can see all of our customers. Let's say I just want to see across all of my customers what the revenue and count of orders is for chocolate chip cookies. Well, let's look here at all of the different fields, and here I have one for product, and I want to filter based on the product. Here I could click on product and I'll drag it down to this square titled filters. And you'll notice it's now added a filter right here above my pivot table. And currently it's showing me all products across my 5 customers. Here I could click on that dropdown. Once again, this is that filter dropdown. And let's select chocolate chip, then click on OK. And now here across my 5 customers, I can see what the revenue for chocolate chip is and the count of orders for chocolate chip. So once again, it couldn't be any easier. I'm just dragging and dropping. To remove that filter, I could simply pull this out again, and that removes that filter. And now here I see the revenue for all of my different products again. Now, let's say I just want to see the total revenue and not broken down by customer. Over here in the rows, I can pull customer ID out. And here now I just see the total revenue and the total count of orders. But I actually like seeing it broken down by customer. I could click on customer ID again, drag it down into the rows, and here once again I see the revenue and orders by customer. But let's say I also want to see the products ordered by customer. Well, here I could select product. I could drag it down, drop it underneath the customer ID. And here I can now see for customer 1, I can see all the products and how much revenue and orders each of those products had. And look at how easy it is to build these different views. You could probably tell I'm a big fan of pivot tables. Over here, you'll notice that the revenue is not sorted. Here, once again, just like you could do in many other places, we can right click and this opens up a context menu. And here's that option to sort. So I could sort from largest to smallest. And that applies sorting within my pivot table. That's pretty neat. Now, let's say I actually want to see products across the top and customers down on the side. Here I currently have product in rows, but I could click on that and I could drag it over to the columns. And here we see the customers as the rows, and here I have all of my products across the different columns. Now, let's say I want to remove the count of orders. I could drag that out. And here I just see the revenue by product by customer in this nicely formatted table. As I work with this pivot table, one thing you might notice is that this bottom here maps exactly to how it appears within the pivot table over on the left-hand side. Here, once again, I have my rows, which is the customer ID. This is on the left-hand side, and here we see the rows. Then I have my columns up here in the top right, and here I have my columns in the top right. And then right here, I see my values or the revenue, and here I see the values right here. So once again, this is a mapping of the pivot table that you see over here. One of the great things about using pivot tables is as we manipulate these different views and as we sort the data, it doesn't at all impact the original source data. Here on my data management sheet, this data stays as is. I could change this view, I could pivot it in different ways, and once again, my data stays safe. When I have a cell selected within the pivot table, up on the top tabs, you'll see that there are two new tabs. We have Pivot Table Analyze and also Design. When I click on Design here, I could change the styles of the pivot table. So I could change the coloring. Once again, I could change whether it shows banded rows or banded columns, whether it shows headers or row headers, and I have other options as well to adjust how exactly this pivot table looks. Within Pivot Table Analyze, here I could change the data source. Let's say some additional orders came in and I want to make sure to include them in my analysis. Here I can change the data source, or let's say additional data came in, I could also refresh it as well. Some neat features here, I could insert a slicer. So let's say I want to slice based on the product. Here I'll select product, click on OK, and this now inserts a slicer. Let's say I just want to look at chocolate chip. I could click on that and that updates the view just to that cookie type. I could press Control and select another one, and that updates my slicer to show those two. So this is another way to filter your data. I'll turn off this filter right here, and this brings back the original pivot table view. With this pivot table, we just have all these numbers in here, and earlier we looked at how you could insert charts, and you can also insert a chart based on a pivot table. Now, earlier when we looked at charts, we saw that the shortcut key to insert a chart is Alt F1. I'll press that shortcut key, and here that inserts a chart based on this pivot table. And as I adjust the pivot table, that'll update the chart. So let's say I don't want the product. I just want to see the revenue by customer. Here I could pull product out, and you'll notice that the chart automatically updates based on the data that appears within the pivot table. It's a really quick way to visualize what your data looks like. And once again, no formulas needed. Pivot tables are really great for exploring your data and also discovering insights about your data, but sometimes maybe you just want a little bit of inspiration. Here, I'll click back into data management, and once again, I'll place my cursor within this table of data. Right up here, let's click on the Insert tab, and there's also another category called Recommended Pivot Tables. When I click on that, it opens up a pane over on the right-hand side, and here you see all of these different pre-created pivot table views, and some of them have some really interesting views at the data. If I like one of these, here I could add it to a new sheet. And once again, this inserts a pivot table, and it's already added various fields to the rows, to the values, and to the columns. So this is another neat way that you can explore your data using pivot tables.